Call of the Archons, the first set of KeyForge, is a set known for its incredibly powerful cards. Many of the best cards in the game came from this set. Hunting Witch, Too Much to Protect, and Library Access are just a few iconic examples. In fact, there were some cards that were so immensely powerful, like Library Access, that they needed to be eroded, that is, brought down a notch or two in terms of power level. Bait and Switch is another example of a card that needed this because it was simply breaking the game. However, Library Access and Bait and Switch were cards that could be fixed quite easily. Library Access now gets purged upon play. Bait and Switch can now only steal twice. But there is one card from Call of the Archons that couldn't be fixed quite so easily, and the developers of KeyForge have been trying to get it right ever since its original appearance, every set having some new incarnation of the card. This card is Control the Weak. Control the Weak is an action card from House Dis that reads, Play. Choose a house on your opponent's identity card. Your opponent must choose that house as their active house on their next turn. Immediately, one should be able to see the sheer power that this card possesses. Forcing your opponent to call a certain house on their next turn is one of the most disruptive things you can do, and it's not very hard to correctly time playing it to really restrict your opponent's next play. Not only that, but Control the Weak's rarity was set to common, so this card could appear in multiples in a deck, and oftentimes that's what happened. There's even one deck, Furic the Madman of Highshire, with 5 copies of Control the Weak, making for what I could only assume to be an incredibly suffocating deck to play against. Control the Weak as a card in of itself is incredibly powerful, and the fact that you get an Ember when you play it is honestly unbelievable. However, another card exists within Call of the Archons, which is essentially Control the Weak's opposite, yet is still incredibly powerful. This card is Restringuntus, a 1-power disc creature that reads, Choose a house. Your opponent cannot choose that house as their active house until Restringuntus leaves play. This is another card that can absolutely stifle your opponent. Restricting them to only 2 of their 3 houses can mess up their game plan completely. If you keep them from calling shadows, perhaps they won't be able to take you off check. Or if you keep them off something like Logos or Star Alliance, they won't be able to reach their key combo pieces as quickly as normal. Those are a couple situations in which Restringuntus is really a pain, and combined with other discards, such as Ember Imp or Succubus, Restringuntus' power is amplified exponentially. Restringuntus can even win you the game straight away. If the opponent has a hand consisting of a single house, and you play Restringuntus, preventing them from calling that house, that's game over. Perhaps they have a couple other creatures out there they can use, but they are locked out of their hand, and you can probably take care of those creatures they're using one way or another. And at that point, the game is just finished. There's nothing the opponent can do, and you simply win. Restringuntus was definitely a powerful card, but Control the Weak was still king of the hill in terms of disruption. The power contained within Control the Weak made it among the most infamous Coda cards, and hasn't been seen since. Going into Age of Ascension, Restringuntus still existed, and introduced to the game was the disc creature Tezmal. Tezmal is a 2-power elusive creature that reads, Reap, choose a house. Your opponent cannot choose that house as their active house on their next turn. Tezmal's differences from Restringuntus gives it some interesting gameplay opportunities. If Tezmal sticks around for multiple turns, you can use it to choose different houses every reap, whereas Restringuntus can only restrict one. Tezmals are especially dangerous when they come in pairs, potentially locking the opponent out of 2 of their houses. Or, worst of all, although extremely rare and hard to pull off, is 2 Tezmals and the Rocket Boots Logos upgrade, allowing one Tezmal to reap twice and the other to reap once, thus choosing all 3 houses and locking the opponent out of their entire deck. Moving into Worlds Collide is a set of 3 cards that attempted to balance out the effects of Control the Weak even more, those of Snag, Snag's Mirror, and Snaglet. We'll start with Snag, who reads, Fight. Your opponent must choose the house of the creature Snag fights as their active house on their next turn. Being a 5-power creature, chances are high you will get at least 1 fight out of Snag, if not 2. Clearly, Control the Weak's original potency has been nerfed quite a bit at this point, and Snag certainly has its highs and lows as a creature. If you get multiple fights out of Snag, being able to pull off its effect multiple times can be quite useful, but sometimes you won't have any creatures that are useful to fight, or all the opponent's creatures have such high power that Snag will die when he fights into them. A card relating to Snag in both name and ability is Snag's Mirror, an artifact that reads, After a player chooses an active house, their opponent cannot choose the same house as their active house on their next turn. This artifact is something of a weird one. If the two opposing decks don't share any of the same houses, Snag's Mirror is utterly useless besides its bonus Ember Pip. But if the two decks share the exact same 3 houses, games can become really long and challenging, involving lots of strategy and foresight. That can be fun and or competitive for sure, but can also result in long, boring slogs of games, where each turn you only have 2 houses to choose from, really limiting any potential gameplay for both players. Snag's Mirror definitely has its uses, but I feel like a lot of the time it results in suboptimal plays across both sides of the board, and its power is very dependent on deck matchups. After Snag and Snag's Mirror comes Snaglet, a 2-power elusive disc creature that reads Action, choose a house. If your opponent chooses that house as their active house on their next turn, steal 2 Ember. Now this effect still gives your opponent free choice of all 3 of their houses, but still poses a decent threat with that steal 2 Ember looming over your opponent's potential game plan. Usually your opponent can navigate around Snaglet's action without too much of a drawback, but sometimes it's either have a super suboptimal play or lose 2 Ember to your opponent, and putting your opponent in that lose-lose situation is exactly what you want Snaglet to do. In the very next set, Mass Mutation, Control the Weak evolved yet again into what I believe to be its most balanced version so far, Mark of Dis. Mark of Dis reads, Play, deal 2 damage to a creature. If it is not destroyed, its controller must choose that creature's house as their active house on their next turn. This attaches a condition to Control the Weak that gives the card a level of finesse to play effectively, and yet doesn't make the card totally powerless. Sometimes you won't have a good opportunity to play Mark of Dis. Perhaps the opponent doesn't have any creatures, or the creatures they do have are 2 power or less, or they're damaged to the point where 2 more damage will kill them. But a lot of the time, Mark of Dis can really mess your opponent up, and combined with other cards like Gateway to Dis or Pain Reaction, its power level really gets elevated. In multiples, Mark of Dis truly is a card to be feared. The most recent set is that of Dark Tidings, and House Dis was rotated out for this set and got replaced by House Unfathomable. So far, all of these cards have belonged to Dis, as Dis has historically been the house associated with disruption and impeding your opponent's gameplay. With Dis gone in Dark Tidings, the other houses had to pick up the slack left behind, and most of it was picked up by Unfathomable. In regards to the evolution of Control the Weak, this was featured in a fantastic card called Illusions of Grandeur. Illusions of Grandeur reads, Play, choose a house on your opponent's identity card. If your opponent does not choose that house as their active house on their next turn, gain 3 Ember. Similar to Snaglet, Illusions of Grandeur leaves your opponent with the free choice of all 3 houses, but gaining 3 whole Ember is a huge threat. That's a whole half a key. Putting your opponent in a tricky situation is exactly what Illusions of Grandeur does 9 times out of 10, potentially forcing them into a suboptimal house or giving you 3 free Ember for a good turn. As a variation on Control the Weak, I love it. I feel like it's nearly as fine-tuned as Mark of Dis, striking a balance between the frequent ineffectiveness of Snag's Mirror and the overpoweredness of Control the Weak. It makes a perfect addition to the Unfathomable card pool, and I sure hope it makes a return in Winds of Exchange later on. The last of these cards that involve house manipulation is, surprisingly, a Star Alliance card, the Ulfbert device. It's an artifact that reads, each player cannot choose the same active house they chose on their previous turn. This seems like an odd one to me, and I don't have much experience with it. Unlike Snag's Mirror, which was very deck matchup dependent in its effectiveness, the Ulfbert device is effective for both players constantly, and I'd imagine a decent amount of strategy would need to go into playing around this card. Navigating the restrictions put in place by this artifact seems like it would be a challenge, never being able to call the same house more than once in a row, which could definitely throw your opponent off guard if you know your own deck well enough to play around it. Let me know of any insight you guys might have regarding this card down in the comments below. I would love to know more about this wacky card. And that wraps up the evolution of Control the Weak. Call of the Archons was a set known for its powerhouse cards, and Control the Weak was among the best of them. Truly a card to be feared when encountered. Since its introduction, the designers of the game have done a lot to make its general concept a little more fair while retaining its disruptive nature, and I feel like in recent sets they've done a really good job of that, with cards like Mark of Dis and Illusions of Grandeur. Let me know what you guys think of these cards down below, and which iteration of Control the Weak you think was the most balanced. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm so glad to be putting out content you all enjoy, and I can't wait to see you all again in the next one. See you later.